James Kaufman, World News Report today, February 3rd, 2025. God bless you and yours, no matter where you are in the world. Please subscribe, give us a thumbs up, ring that bell for critical future updates. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Archbishop Vigano has written another open letter, this time to Donald Trump and American Catholics. Let's listen to what he has to say.
A letter to American Catholics. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. The recent inauguration of President Donald J. Trump, after his landslide victory in the presidential election, is a reason for great hope for every American Catholic, but also for all those Catholics in Western nations, which today have been subjected to the globalist coup, who are aware of the need and also the concrete possibility of rebelling against the tyranny of the New World Order, always with the help of God before it is too late. What the deep state prevented with electoral fraud in 2020 has now been achieved. For the first time after years of woke madness, a president of the United States can carry out the program for which he was elected, restoring those principles of natural law that are the basis of civil life and a well-ordered society. It is the revolution of common sense, or better said, the counter-revolution of common sense. The conflict of interest of Trump's opponents. But if Christians and all people of good will almost seem to breathe a collective sigh of relief as they see the president's campaign promises materialize day after day, starting with the abolition of LGBTQ+ and gender indoctrination in schools. It should not be surprising that the election of Donald Trump represents a real disaster for many others. Among these, there are certainly characters with more than questionable conduct, exponents of the pharmaceutical, food, and military lobbies, tycoons of high finance or international organizations, who have benefited and still continue to do so in terms of power and money from woke ideology, the Agenda 2030, net zero, pandemics, smart cities, and uncontrolled immigration. Individuals whom no one has elected and who have no right to interfere in the government of nations other than the blackmail power they have acquired over their servants and the corruption of their accomplices have created false emergencies, health emergencies, war emergencies, economic, climatic, and social emergencies, in order to be able to impose their solutions based on false data. Many of you have realized the incongruity of the responses that governments and international organizations gave to certain events. For example, because of the alleged causal relationship between the percentage of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and alleged global warming, the false premise, and the supposedly consequent need to reduce its presence in the atmosphere, the false objective. Draconian measures have been applied in the Western nations to reduce the emission of CO2, the false solution, the true purpose of emergencies. This apparent inconsistency is due to a fact that is slowly beginning to be understood by more and more people. The ultimate purpose of all these so-called emergencies is to justify the adoption of social, economic, food, and health policies which are intended to invariably lead to a drastic reduction in the world population. This is the declared goal of the followers of the World Economic Forum in Davos, headed by Klaus Schwab. It does not matter if the population dies from cancers induced by vaccines, from poisons added to food or sprayed from the sky, from harmful substances released into the water, from sterility psychologically induced by LGBTQ+ ideology, or surgically from gender transition, from poverty caused by rising inflation, from wars, or from the violence and crimes of illegal immigrants. The final result corresponds to a precise neo-Malthusian project, which Bill Gates and other self-styled philanthropists pursue as the main objective of their companies and foundations. It is no mystery that private supranational organizations such as the UN, WHO, WEF, World Bank, European Central Bank, and International Monetary Fund answer to a board of directors, whose members are all convinced supporters of demographic decline and the need to replace national sovereignty with the New World Order. It is also no mystery that there are enormous conflicts of interest in the public sector as well, deriving from the lobbying activity of multinational corporations or other bodies that interfere in the government of nations. Members of the United States Congress receive large sums of money from multinational corporations in exchange for the approval of laws that benefit them. This applies to the military, pharmaceutical, agri-food, and technology industries. Without these undue and subversive interferences, we would never have had the COVID pandemic, the bird flu scare, electric cars, the wars in Ukraine and in the Middle East, synthetic meat, flour made from insects, and geoengineering. All of these emergencies have as their immediate purpose the enrichment of specific financial lobbies, which are often part of the same investment funds. Two subversive entities. Among the entities that support the globalist agenda, for the profits they derive from it in terms of power and money, is the deep state, made up of those apparatuses that have embedded themselves within the government, and that determine its political action and choices, regardless of the colour of the various alternating administrations, acting for their own interests against those of the citizens they claim to serve. However, there is also what I myself have called the deep church, which is similarly composed of exponents of the Catholic hierarchy, who, after decades of progressive infiltration and occupation, have come to take full control of the Catholic Church, along with Jorge Mario Bergoglio. These fifth columns of the globalist elite use their authority for the interests of third parties, in opposition to the glory of God, the honour of the Church, and the good of souls. These two subversive entities, deep state and deep church, as I recalled in my first open letter to President Trump in 2020, are mirror images and complementary. Their members are traitors in the service of illegitimate powers, which we have seen acting in a coordinated way during the pandemic farce, with green fraud and trafficking in illegal immigrants. American citizens and faithful Catholics have now understood that the serious social, economic and religious crisis of the nation has been caused and prepared from afar by the coup of these forces, subverting legitimate authority, one in the civil sphere and the other in the religious sphere. Americans have also come to understand that there is a huge difference between the refugee fleeing persecution and an organised mass of adult men of military age, transferred in a systematic way within national borders, who effectively constitute in a contingent of enemy soldiers and a potential threat to national security and the safety of citizens. The complicity of the deep state with the deep church. The proof of the complicity between the deep state and the deep church is given not only by the fact that both support the programmatic points of Agenda 2030 because they derive an immediate advantage from them, but also by their mutual unwillingness to accept the reality that a legitimately elected president now desires to concretely implement the commitments he made during his electoral campaign. Their resistance is due to the fact that Trump's initiatives seek to put an end to the network of interests and profits that they have fraudulently constructed in recent years. It is no mystery that the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops has never, and I repeat, never, raised a penny to fight abortion, but rather has funded with tens of millions of dollars associations that adhere to the Catholic Campaign for Human Development and promote abortion, contraception, and homosexuality. Nor does the USCCB have any qualms about receiving subsidies from the Department of the Treasury for its management of illegal immigration, as its budgets, which are public, prove. And it should be remembered that, in addition to government funds, the USCCB receives funding from institutions and private foundations for the same purposes. If in fact, as some would have us believe, the Bergoglian hierarchy truly had at heart the salvation of souls, of all souls, both the souls of US citizens and the souls of the migrants who arrive on US territory, it should be doing what the Catholic Church has already very successfully undertaken in the past, providing for the evangelization, conversion, and religious instruction of these souls. I am thinking, for example, of St. Frances Xavier Cabrini, the foundress of the Missionaries of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, the first American citizen to be raised to the honours of the altar. Her work of assistance to immigrants expanded to include all those in need. She built churches, kindergartens, schools, boarding schools for female students, orphanages, retirement homes for lay and religious women, hospitals, and colleges thanks to the generosity of Catholics. Her example of a true apostolic and missionary spirit has been renounced, and cancel culture, so much in vogue today in the Bergoglian Church, is almost ashamed of the charitable work undertaken by her and other saints. The lucrative business of immigration. What is happening today is precisely the opposite of the Church's true mission. The hierarchy is only concerned with grabbing government funding for the management of welcoming immigrants at taxpayer expense, or for the provision of morally unacceptable treatments in so-called Catholic hospitals, even including mutilation for gender transition. In America, there are hundreds of nominally Catholic institutions that receive public money to provide services that are entirely incompatible with the Catholic magisterium. That, by promoting the indiscriminate welcoming of immigrants, the bishops show that they care more about the profits of the illegal immigrant business rather than the salvation of souls, the authentic social redemption of the weakest, or the protection of the flock entrusted to them. And here it is appropriate to remind the Catholic faithful that the bishops have first of all a moral responsibility before God and the Church for the sheep of their flock, whom they have a duty to protect from the attacks of wolves. The complicity of so many of the bishops of the United States in the present crisis derives from their total concurrence with globalism, whose soul is intrinsically anti-Christic and therefore anti-religious and anti-human. This complicity is expressed not only in the promotion of the indiscriminate reception of illegal immigrants, but also in the other sustainable goals of Agenda 2030, including LGBTQ+ ideology and gender theory. In the United States, according to current data, there are over 150 Catholic hospitals that offer treatment, that is, genital mutilation for gender transition. It should not surprise anyone that the American economist Mariana Mazzucato, a member of the World Economic Forum, here, with ties to the Club of Rome, here, has been appointed by Bergoglio to the Pontifical Academy for Life, despite being an atheist and pro-abortionist. In November 2024, she declared at the annual meeting of Davos that since the elite has not managed to vaccinate the entire world population through the pandemic crisis, it is necessary to focus on a less abstract strategy, such as a water crisis. The Biden administration, and more generally all recent US administrations, both those led by Democrats and those led by neocons, have distinguished themselves for having financed abortion, genital mutilation even of young adolescents, genetic manipulation, surrogate motherhood, and euthanasia with public funding. Although the Catholic Church condemns these aberrations without exception, the silence of the American bishops has been deafening. This makes it clear that there is nothing genuinely Catholic about the pastoral action of these bishops, and that the only reason that leads the episcopate to support a government is the advantage it can derive from it in terms of power and money, even if this means abandoning millions of human beings who have been brought into the United States by criminal organizations in order to then be exploited as slaves in humiliating working conditions, or forced into prostitution, drug dealing, and the black market of organ predation. This mass of victims of elite cynicism weighs on the conscience of many rulers and many bishops, and the new Trump administration gives hope that a wise regulation of the migration phenomenon can largely solve the problems of security and crime that all citizens have come to know only too well. The Bergoglian Church is an accomplice in ethnic replacement. In this context, it is dismaying to hear the words of Jorge Mario Bergoglio, who recently stated, referring to Italy but speaking about the entire Western world, that in the face of demographic decline, the only workable solution is to import immigrants, thus concretizing the ethnic replacement theorized by Kalergi, the pan-European. This proposal is also widely reflected in similar requests from multinational corporations, who see the importation of immigrants as a way to drastically reduce the cost of labour to the detriment of native workers, further increasing their profits. As we can see, authority is now completely subservient to the diktats of the elite, with the complicity of the mainstream media, even if this leads to a worsening of the social and working conditions of the population. Or rather, it is precisely for this reason, since, as I said, the ultimate goal of this lobby is the extermination of a sizable portion of the human race. The numbers speak for themselves. Finally, we cannot forget that the budgets of US dioceses, already largely compromised by the millions of dollars doled out in compensation for the cases of sexual abuse, and also depleted by the abandonment of an ever-increasing number of faithful from the official Catholic Church because of its betrayal of its nature and mission, have their main income from government funds given to them for the purpose of welcoming immigrants. Along with Catholic charitable organizations, the sum received by the American Catholic Church for welcoming immigrants amounts to over $2.4 billion, an exorbitant figure that highlights at least a serious conflict of interest, and that does not solve the social problems that derive from it in the least. And it is gravely detrimental to the entire Catholic Church to have bishops for whom the maintenance of power renders irrelevant the link between the presence of thousands of irregular minors on American soil and their exploitation by perverts, pedophiles, organ harvesters, and criminals of all kinds. President Trump and Vice President Vance are demonstrating that they know how to protect the little ones of whom the gospel speaks, contrary to what the American bishops and Bergoglio himself have done thus far. The counter-revolution of common sense. President Trump's executive orders can only be hailed as absolutely supported by every Catholic worthy of the name, just as Catholics ought to praise the support shown by the President and Vice President for the March for Life, which the previous administration officially opposed, even to the point of arresting those who prayed silently near abortion clinics. Donald Trump's presidential pardon for those who had been so imprisoned confirms a reversal of the trend with respect to the Catholic Joe Biden, just as the end of public funding for the abortion multinational corporation, Planned Parenthood, and the providential cuts and disbursements to self-styled Catholic organisations that favour illegal immigration represent a radical change. The statement that there are only two sexes in its banal obviousness is now a revolutionary proposition, what President Trump calls the revolution of common sense. Yet bishops, priests and nuns deplore his action as divisive. But if anyone is sowing division, it is precisely those who are feeding the monstrosities of woke ideology against the mandate they have received from Christ. First and foremost, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the role of the USCCB. And, of course, it is not surprising that McCarrick's heirs, who have been promoted by Bergoglio to the top of the Catholic Church in the United States, are so prompt to deplore the policies of cancelling laws in favour of woke ideology, starting with those who denied the binary complementarity of the sexes and recognised gender dysphoria, even in minors. Their subordination to the LGBTQ+ lobby is widely proven, both institutionally and personally, and it is well known, as Dr. Taylor Marshall has pointed out, that almost all Catholic bishops in the United States have been vetted and nominated by the previous 3 liberal cardinals in Washington, D.C., McCarrick, Werrell, and Gregory, and then appointed directly by Bergoglio. Marshall rightly comments, "Company men follow company orders. They all owe each other." These serious deviations within the clergy and bishops will have to be the subject of a great operation of removal and reform in due time, because they constitute a subversive element within the ecclesial structure that is irreconcilable with the faith and morals of the Catholic Church. The bishops' conferences themselves, a spurious body of parliamentarian matrix that has no legitimacy from a doctrinal and canonical point of view, represent an independent entity that have been transformed over the past few decades into political lobbying groups by the ultra-progressive bishops. The proposal to revoke the USCCB's tax-exempt status should therefore be widely supported by faithful Catholics. And of course Bergoglio should be the first to support this salutary initiative, since, after all, he desires a poor church for the poor. Catholics also have the possibility of redirecting their offerings and donations to those ecclesial realities that remain faithful to tradition and the perennial magisterium of the Catholic Church, withholding them from the dioceses, whose bishops impose doctrinal errors and moral deviations. The government can also intervene without violating the freedom of the Church, in order to bring to light and severely punish the scandals and cover-ups that have not prevented certain prelates from being appointed to the head of the most prestigious dioceses in America, not least the newly appointed Archbishop of Washington, Robert McElroy. Many Catholics expect justice to be done, first of all out of respect for the victims who have thus far been abandoned by both civil power and ecclesiastical authority. The withdrawal from the WHO, Catholics are in absolute agreement with Donald Trump and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. about the exit of the United States of America from the World Health Organization that was accomplished by a recent executive order. The policies promoted by this private organization, financed mainly by pharmaceutical companies and Bill Gates, for so-called reproductive health and for gender equality, along with claims about the supposed sexual rights of minors and disturbing initiatives to decriminalize pedophilia, cannot be accepted or even financed by American Catholics. The same applies to the global health policies, which the WHO would like to impose on sovereign nations, the woke church. American Catholics have the right to demand that their bishops behave in accordance with the perennial magisterium of the Catholic Church, and that they not lend any moral or material support to what is repugnant to the natural law, even before it is a violation of the commandments of God. It is therefore outrageous and scandalous to learn from the Davos Forum that important LGBTQ+ organizations consider Jorge Mario Bergoglio a precious ally in achieving their agenda of normalizing sexual perversions. In the civil sphere, the emissaries of the deep state have seriously compromised citizens' trust in institutions and governments, and it will be up to President Trump and his administration to restore the trust and respect that previous governments have deliberately undermined in recent years. Similarly, the deep church has heavily delegitimized the faithful's trust in the Catholic Church and her hierarchy, but we do not know when the occupation of these heretics and perverts will end. For this reason, it is understandable that Catholics feel somehow more protected by a Protestant president than by their Pope, who is not Catholic and perhaps not even Christian, in the fight the president is leading against the deep state and the globalist left. Indeed, they have a Pope who perfectly embodies the one who is intended to replace Benedict XVI, as revealed by John Podesta's emails published by WikiLeaks in 2016. And to close the magic circle of vices and perversions, it is enough to remember that among Podesta's closest collaborators is Slade Somer, who was arrested in 2023 for paedophilia and child pornography. We're talking about an important collaborator of Hillary Clinton and John Podesta, linked to the world of Broadway and cinema, who had worked in the effort to debunk the infamous Pizzagate, that is, the network of vile complicities and horrendous crimes against minors that revolves around the international deep state. How can we think that characters, organic to the system of corruption, can condemn the vices and crimes that involve them first and foremost? And how can we be surprised by the hysterical reaction of certain bishops and cardinals now that they are facing the removal of a trough from which they have continually feasted? The real battle begins now. It is difficult to predict how these subversive forces will react to the organised and incisive action of the Trump administration. Nonetheless, it is likely that the colossal economic interests and the existing network of corruption will lead to a clash between opposing and irreconcilable forces. In this battle, which St. Paul rightly points out is preeminently a spiritual one, the role of Catholics will be decisive, and it will be a battle fought with no holds barred. If the deep state went to the point of subverting the results of the 2020 presidential election, and the deep church went to the point of placing on the chair of Peter its own emissary, who would embody the woke ideals of a progressive spring, welcomed by the deep state, it is unlikely that they will give up the power they have acquired just because the majority of Americans now understand the threat that they represent. Indeed, the increasingly widespread awareness of the coup perpetrated by the globalist elite and the end of the censorship system of some social platforms make this reda rationem inevitable. And along with the collapse of the woke cabal in the United States, the subversive lobby of other nations will also begin to fall like dominoes, beginning in Europe. The meaning of the word apocalypse is unveiling, revelation. In these epical times, the forces of good must finally unite to form a common front against the forces of evil, which have always been organised and very powerful. And Catholics must understand that, as sacred scripture and the magisterium of the Church teach, as the end times approach, there will be a clash that will make the two sides become clear. This will be the true unveiling, the true revelation, as announced to the blessed Virgin Mary by the prophet Simeon. Behold, this child is destined for the fall and rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be spoken against, so that the thoughts of many hearts may be revealed. This unveiling will show us the true intentions hidden behind the emergencies and crises speciously planned by the globalist elite and ratified by the Bergoglian Church, and will force us to side either with Christ or against Christ, since no one can serve two masters. You cannot serve both God and money as we see is truly Satan's manure, the fuel that feeds the infernal machine of the New World Order. Authority on earth, both temporal and spiritual, belongs exclusively to our Lord Jesus Christ, King and High Priest. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me, said our Lord. He grants it in a vicarious form to his representatives, so that they may exercise it within the well-defined boundaries of good and truth. If this vicarious authority, whether temporal or spiritual, is exercised against the purpose for which it was willed by God, it becomes illegitimate and null. For this reason, faced with the evidence of the betrayal of those who hold authority on earth, all Catholics must refuse to give obedience to one who was the first to disobey Christ, nor must they attribute to Holy Church the faults, however horrible, of her unworthy ministers. Rather, we must pray that the Lord will guard his sheep and punish the wolves who are disguised as sheep. Let us remember with sure hope the words of the Lord. These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take courage. I have overcome the world. Conclusion. Now, while it is true that all salvation ultimately comes from God, this does not mean that we may simply passively sit around waiting for divine intervention. No, we must cooperate with God's grace through personal commitment, courageous testimony, and the coherent witness of our lives. Let us therefore begin to make this counter-revolution of common sense our own, rejecting the lies and deceptions of those who seek to subvert the very foundations of the natural law after having trampled on the divine law. Let us defend the family, children, and those who are weak. Let us jealously guard our faith, the civilization built on its foundation, and the traditions of our fathers. May the Most Holy Virgin of Guadalupe, Empress of the Americas, spread her protective mantle over all of you, dear brothers and sisters, over President Trump and Vice President Vance, and over all those who refuse to retreat in the face of the arrogance of the wicked. And may God bless the United States of America. Carlo Maria Vigano, Archbishop, February 2nd, 2025. Purification of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Presentation in the Temple of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Well, Archbishop Vigano pretty much laid it down as usual. God bless this gentleman. He has been excommunicated in, I think, 2022 for quote-unquote blasphemy, which in the Catholic Church's eyes now is the truth. God bless you and yours. Please share our video. Please subscribe, and always remember, anything's possible in Bizarro World.